Spencer, Plymouth Realty LLC, 10 Collins Avenue, map 101, lots 42-1, 42-9, 38, and 32H. Construct a 137,500 square foot industrial manufacturing building at the site. Stormwater and erosion control will be implemented. Grading and leveling of the site will entail earth removal of plus or minus 488,000 cubic yards from the site. Please note, the planning board previously determined that this unified complex and that applicant will seek approval of a solar installation at the site via a separate application. What I would like to do at this point is bring this back to Mr. Spencer and whomever to address this plan and answer or talk about our questions at the last meeting before I bring it back to the audience and the board. Is there someone here?
Good. All right, good evening. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Carver, members of the board. My name is Bill Sims, and I appeared before you a month ago on behalf of Spencer, Plymouth Realty, and Northeast Traffic Control, in what is a continuation tonight of that public hearing last month on the site plan review, at which time the board requested a brief adjournment so that a few additional concerns could be addressed. So it is I don't know what's going on here. Can I be heard okay without the squelch? Okay. It's our plan and hope tonight that the presentation be limited to those issues of concern raised at the last meeting, that we can avoid dedicating any significant time tonight on other issues raised in the past and which are clearly not relevant to these proceedings. With me tonight is Mr. Scott Spencer, his son Shay, Mr. Mike Sutton via Zoom, all from Northeast Traffic Control, and along with that group is Mr. Rich Tabazinski from Atlantic Design Engineers, the project engineer, and Mr. Rob Reifus and Mr. Jim Miller from R2 Architecture, the project architects on this job. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rich at this moment so that he can address the concerns raised at the last meeting and continue our presentation. All yours, Rich.
Good evening, Rich. Good evening, Rich Tabazinski with Atlantic Design Engineers. And I had submitted, I believe you have in your package, a letter that we had put together that outlined basically 4 bullet points that we believe kind of summarized the issues that were brought up, the major issues that were brought up at the last meeting. And I'll just wanted to run through them briefly and give you our response, and then I'll introduce the architects on the project who had provided an additional cross-section view for your consideration. So in terms of the comments that we had heard last week, or several weeks ago, one of the items was related to potentially reducing the project size, the building size, parking to provide more buffers and a smaller development. And basically, the main things that we wanted to reiterate is that the project, the building itself, and it is the same building that was previously approved several years ago by the board. It's the same footprint, same building size, and it is what is needed by the developer, the owner of the property. It is what is needed for not only his operation, but potential future affiliated operations that will be utilizing the facility. In addition to that, the buffers that we are providing with the new development are actually in excess of what was previously approved by this board. And we provided several renditions of the site plan, colored up versions. One sitting in front of me here today shows that those buffers have been increased overall over what was previously approved. So the development footprint is what it is. It's going to stay, and as what we propose on our plans. But we did want to offer one suggestion, and that is a reduction in some of the parking spaces. The bylaw under the unified complex allows for us to reduce the number of spaces on this site versus what your bylaw specifically requires. Without getting into all the math, if we go to the maximum extent that the bylaw allows in terms of a reduction, just 33%, we can take off about 9 or 10 spaces off of the project. Now that might not seem too much, but it'll effectively allow us to install some rain gardens within the parking areas, increase some landscaped islands, and that will enhance the drainage system that was designed. And that was, again, one of the comments we heard at the last meeting was that the drainage system, I think it was commented that it better be a good system. And we're proposing this as an improvement to what we even have designed as a way of reducing the parking and allowing more room for some green landscaped rain gardens within the parking area. Another issue that was brought up is basically as a reduction in the earth removal from the site. So as you know from the last meeting, the main focus of our presentation was the visibility of the property or the project from Route 3, basically the gateway into Plymouth. And so with keeping the footprint and the development footprint the same, the only way to reduce the earth removal on the site is essentially to raise everything up so that it would be more of a balanced site. Basically, that's more of what was previously approved by this board, but obviously that does several things. It increases the height of retaining walls that are needed, it reduces the buffers that are allowed, and it also provides a project that's visible, highly visible from Route 3. So when we had originally submitted our application, we had a letter that outlined the justification for where the site grades where they are. And again, we stand by that letter in terms of it provides the best way of screening the project from Route 3 and allows that visibility to be very limited along with our proposed screening. So if the concern of the board, I guess, relating to the earth removal is the potential for the site to be excavated and then just left barren and out for a number of years, the developer is basically willing to commit to having the earth removal done within a year's period, and then actually provide a bond to make sure that the project is fully constructed within 3 years. Those numbers, we're putting out there as an offer, but, those are open to negotiation. But basically, we feel that gives the board some assurance that the project's not going to just be a barren, open gravel pit for years and years to come. The other comments, one of the other comments related to the effect of the drainage system, or the effect of stormwater or the project on the aquifer. So we did take a look at some regional groundwater maps, looked at the DEP designations for Zone 2s and your town designated aquifer protection area. We're definitely on the outskirts of any of those areas. Groundwater from this area is flowing towards the bay, towards Plymouth Bay, and the elevations of the water table are at approximately 90. So our site, our base elevation is at elevation 130 for the basic development footprint. We have a couple basins that are excavated down maybe another 5 feet below that. But essentially, we have a 35 to 40 foot stratum of natural material that'll be still in place below our lowest excavated areas. So that provides plenty of filtering for any stormwater on the site before it actually reaches the groundwater table. If I recall, if we were in one of your aquifer protection areas, we would allow it to be go to within 10 feet of the groundwater. We're obviously 3 or 4 times higher than that. And in terms of the stormwater system itself, we have, the system is designed in accordance with your town's drainage guidelines. Now, that's basically this book that I'm holding up in front of you here. It's upwards of 100 pages. It's one of the most comprehensive and strict drainage guidelines that we've ever had to deal with in various towns that we've worked in before. Our design meets those regulations. It also meets the DEP standards for their stormwater management guidelines. And I think we think it not only meets them, but it exceeds some of their requirements. In terms of recharge, the project has a total of 7 above-ground retention basins and 4 below-ground retention basins. So, and those are spread out entirely around the property, not necessarily just dumping all our stormwater into one portion or one section of it. So we're distributing our stormwater throughout the entire 16 acres of the site. And the stormwater, before it reaches those retention areas, those infiltration areas, it'll have a pretreatment system consisting of catch basins to remove oil and grit that have sumps for storage of sediment. But also, we've proposed a series of first defense units. It's a proprietary structure that Mass DEP has approved, and there are several that have been installed in the town. And these are a hydrodynamic system that has that enhances the sediment removal. It's pretty much like I guess a fancy oil water separator, but it basically does a lot more than your typical concrete tanks with baffles. So we've proposed 12 of those throughout the site as pretreatment prior to the stormwater basins. And effectively, what we've been able to do with that is exceed to some of the standards for that I mentioned earlier. TSS removal standard in your town and the DEP, even if you're in an aquifer, is 80% removal. This project will remove 93%. So we feel our stormwater system is state-of-the-art and will protect the aquifer as best as it can be. And we can enhance it now based on the fact that if we were allowed to reduce our parking a little bit, we can add rain gardens to that stormwater system and enhance it even further. And so that's one of the things we're offering to do. In terms of screening, that was inadequacy of the plantings and screenings. That was one of the other issues that was brought up. The revised landscape plan that was submitted with the last application, I just wanted to run some numbers by you. Basically, we proposed a screening of eastern white pines. A total of 57 eastern white pines would be planted along the top of slope along Route 3. And those would be infilled with a total of 58 rhododendrons and 29 viburnum, totaling about 145 plants, shrubs, trees that would be planted along that stretch that would, our designer and we feel is going to provide a healthy screening of the property. And that, along with the slope coming down, will be allowed to naturalize, and over time, that we feel that the screening when plantings will be of adequate size to really protect the view shed for Route 3. What are so part of that proposal, I wanted to introduce the architects from R Squared that did a cross-section view, which they'll present to you, which kind of shows those plantings and gives you an idea of, in sectional view, what the elevations are from Route 3 to the property. So I think, is it Robert, you come in I'll introduce Robert, and he'll discuss those cross-sections.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Reifeis with R Squared Architects. Wanted to kind of present some the visual aspects of what Richard had just spoken about. As you mentioned, originally the site proposed had an elevation of about 143, 145, I believe, in terms of what the ground level was going to be at. That site also happened to be contain a lot of retaining walls that were built right up to the property line, which this rendering shows. If that was the case, you would see most of the site. This is looking south on Route 3, exit 7 here, exit 6 there, or whatever they're known as now. You would see a lot of what Scott's business is the barrels, signage, et cetera. That would be very prevalent. The building would be up that much higher.
Robert?
So after discussions, it was decided that if we could drop the site down to approximately, as Rich said, a 130-foot grade and still maintain about 40 feet above the aquifer, and move the building and the buffer line back, you wind up with a larger green space between the highway and the development. The building is now lower, so it won't be prevalent. It won't be, everybody's been comparing what it might look like to the Amazon building there in Kingston, right at the Kingston-Plymouth line. We're trying to avoid that. Also with the added feature of solar panels that provide shade and covering and somewhat screening of Scott's and New England Traffic's equipment, we feel that kind of benefits the site that much better and allows for a larger buffer between the highway and the development. This also reduces the need for retaining walls that were anywhere from 10 to 18 foot, I believe, in height in some of the areas on the site. By having the buffer actually slope down gradually from the highway down to where the buildable portion of the site actually happens. This is just an overview of what the site would look like, showing the larger buffer area along the highway. And the section that Richard was discussing, here's the overall site plan, reduction of it. The section now shows the highway is at this elevation at approximately 160, and that happens right here about halfway through the length of the property, and the building down at 30 feet. So the top of the building is actually lower than the mounded buffer that they're proposing along the highway. It's also set further back from the roadway, allowing more green space between the road and a lower retaining wall before the parking lot and the development happens. So to that, that's what we offer at this time.
Done? I guess,
Yes,
Robert?
thank you.
Yes.
Yep, thank you. So as the petitioners have mentioned, they've gone through the items that were brought up from the last meeting of working together on the plan, and I think it's really now for the board to be looking at what they're offering and seeing if this is something that you feel you're comfortable with, or if you feel the gravel removal is incidental, or if you want to look at certain items, such as some of these they've mentioned that they're willing to do as conditions of approval. That's pretty much where we're at for you to discuss. Thank you.
you. I will bring it back to the audience now. If there's anyone that would like to make a comment, please state your name and go for it.
I would like to make a comment, if I may.
Okay,
My name's Jonathan Poloni. You may have heard my name mentioned at the last hearing. I'm an attorney with Senior and Associates PC, and I'm here representing Save the Pine Barrens. I have submitted a letter on behalf of Save the Pine Barrens to the building commissioner requesting enforcement of the zoning bylaw. That was based on my conclusion that there were certain errors in the grant of permits based on flaws in the application. That's been denied and it may be appealed. So I just wanted to mention that up front. But concerning this project, there's just a few points that I want to make because I don't want to take up too much of your time. We've seen this project change a lot over the time. I think it's appropriate to view this as basically two separate projects. One project involves the earth removal and the other project involves placing this facility there, constructing the building and whatnot. What's really significant here, and that's come up in the engineer's review, is that you're being asked to approve a project that's going to require an easement from Massachusetts Department of Transportation. That in turn is going to require a real estate evaluation, and that could possibly trigger a NEPA state level review. I think that's something that's important for you to be aware of in terms of your review of this project and how you're going to proceed with your review of this project. I think it's something that needs to be carefully considered because there's a lot that's gone on in this project that has changed and has been modified and added. And I think that there's some concern about what's being presented to you as the board as this project has moved along. I also understand that you have voiced concerns about the impact of groundwater, which I think is important. I think there needs to be attention paid to what they've done for the stormwater pollution prevention plan that it appears they have obtained. I'm not sure if that's something that's been shared or if you've reviewed the construction general permit, but those are things that is a self-certification process. So I certainly think it's worth consideration by this board as well in terms of what's being done there. I do also note that they've made a request to waive the soil testing requirement until after grading is complete. And I think that would be a mistake. I think you really need to understand everything that's going on at this site before any work is undertaken. You've already seen work start when it was expressly prohibited. And I think it would be best to avoid that in the future. I also understand that you would like to keep this review with this board. That was something that I heard voiced at the last hearing. There are certain benefits to having your input into what's going on here, but the critical question about whether this earth removal is incidental or not, I think it still has to be answered. And in my respectful opinion, I don't see how the earth removal of this magnitude is necessary to a project to put a building on this land. We've heard various reasons for it, but this isn't a matter of how it's defined by Black's Law or by reference to any other materials. The simple fact is that the zoning bylaw defines what's incidental and necessary. And I think when you go through those 5 factors and you weigh them, there are certain things that weigh in favor of it being necessary, such as it's certainly associated with the project that's being built. I think that's why they've added in the facility to this project. But it's of a scale that's so huge that it's not minor, it's major. It's more significant than the building in terms of how much material is being extracted from that site. And I think that really puts it in the place of requiring a special permit from the zoning board. It may have been nice at some point to weigh certain alternatives. I'm not sure if that point has passed, but I know the design review guidelines point to different alternatives in terms of siting a building. I think in summary, I think that there are certain representations that are not complete. I have doubts about the completeness of the information that's been provided to you. And I think it's important that you have all that information in order to make the best decision here. So I'm urging you to refer the earth removal to the ZBA for a special permit and get clarification on the issues of the stormwater runoff based on the clearing of the site and the lack of erosion control presently on the site. And continue the hearing until you have all the information that you need in order to make a decision. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, this is Michael Sutton. I just wanted to make a statement relative to the statement that was just made by Mr. Polino about Mass DOT and the easement. It's true that the project has applied for an easement with Mass DOT, but that is for convenience. It is not part and parcel of the project. It is not required to construct this project in any way, shape, or form. That easement is not needed for access. Excuse me, and it is not needed for any grading purposes. That easement is purely for access between parcels for our own convenience. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing no one, I will bring it back to the board for comments, questions, and concerns. But we'll listen first to Robin.
I have nothing else to offer at this point.
Thank you. Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my main concern is there's a lot that I don't know, a lot that I'm confused by. And so I have a series of questions that I hope are answered. I think it was Mr. Sims who said that things that aren't relevant. I find these things very relevant in that some of the problems that we encountered, the sand and gravel removal, were done and need to be those need to be answered. Why it happened and why it continued and why it stopped and all those sorts of things. So first of all, I'll say as well that I'm not sure how many board members here were part of this in 2019. I know I wasn't. My first introduction to this was with the so-called Laydown Proposal. That's what I was visiting the site for. I had been given a proposal that we were supposed to review, and because it was going to come before us, so I was monitoring the site. I wanted to see what it looked like before any work was done. I wanted to understand it a little bit better. I wanted to see it in context. So I'm not sure when Spencer and Northeast became officially involved with this site. That's one of my questions. The original design, which I'll call design number one, that was reviewed by this board in 2019, was that designed with Spencer directly in mind, with Northeast? I'm not sure that's the case. This large building is dramatic increase in the amount of space compared to their facility on Scobie Circle. Can someone answer that directly? Can someone answer these questions for me as I put them out?
Is there anyone here capable of answering those questions?
Yeah, Scott Spencer is.
So the question is, first is, was Northeast involved in the beginning with this proposal that came before us, the board, in 2019? Was it designed with them in mind exclusively?
And the family. And what happened is that it was too costly to do the site work. So they prolonged doing that project. They were doing it as an investment. And after a couple years, that's when I got involved. Hold on. I signed the P&S on 2/18. The zoning permit that they have, all I did was renew it. On 6/10, I was given an extension on 6/22, and we closed on 8/16. So the proposal that was there before, I had nothing to do with it.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. So the design that we saw presented to the planning board in 2021, which I'll call design number 2, which was described as a laydown site, what happened to that?
It's withdrawn. We were looking to get the project going. We were given the advice to maybe start the process to take off 100,000 yards. And at that time, we had decided that it was really not the time or place. We were looking to store some equipment there because we have all the equipment coming back during the winter. But we decided to come up with a comprehensive plan, which you see in front of you today, and withdraw that plan altogether. Now, you had brought up another question, and I just wanted to clarify this. There was some dirt that was taken off, and that was a misunderstanding between myself and the contractor, Lopes. As soon as we got the phone call from Nick, we stopped. But all the rest of the activities, Frank, that you saw down there, that was filling a hole that was at a 100 elevation to a 130 elevation. We were given permission to do so. They said as long as the dirt does not remove off the site, we were allowed to fill in that giant hole that was not a wetland. It was what you see right now in front of the dirt. We were allowed to do so. So all that dirt that you saw moved around, that stayed on site. Now, if I were to stay with the current, if I was to stay with what was asked of us, or the permit that is allowed, I would have to raise that another 47 feet. I'm sorry, another 17 feet to make it a total of 47 feet that we would have to raise. And you do that in compaction lifts of every 2 feet. I put together a good team. We looked at the site. I've lived here for 52 years. We were looking to do something great with a piece of property that laid stagnant for a long time, while also keeping our business in the town of Plymouth. Because I need the space. I do have over 1,000 registered trailers, about 25,000 drums. We need the space.
So there's a big difference between the space for a laydown and the space for 137,005.
The space for the laydown was only to start doing work. In all honesty, it was to start doing work so we can get the final product in front of you. And that's all that was. And then at that point, we decided, you know what? Don't piecemeal this thing. Just go after the full proposal.
So I think you can understand that with a laydown facility before me, for 100,000 to be removed, and I looked at the plans that included this building, and it didn't look to be, they didn't seem to be on the same page. It seemed to be that this was something preliminary, but we weren't involved. We didn't get the chance to site plan review that. Then the next thing I know, there's over 100, essentially 120 truckloads. But let me go into my questions. I appreciate you being willing to talk about this. Just generally, the work that took place at the site far exceeded what most people would consider tree and stump removal. It's a tree and stump removal associated with site work, associated with it, not approving that site work. And then it began and proceeded at a very rapid pace. If they misunderstood you where it said no gravel removal and proceeded for 3 days to take the maximum of what the town would usually put a 40 truckload per day limit on it, and it proceeded at that rapid rate, not somebody going and looking to take a little sand out of a place to allow drilling. So the clear impression is that they're trying to take as much sand and gravel as they could, and it only stopped when
that's a bad impression. Basically, in order for you to do any work, and you know this, you just need a little bit of room. And there's only so many places in that site with the topography, if you actually looked at the property and walked it, the topography is atrocious. So what they were doing was they were trying to just create themselves some room to get working on that hole. But once Nick Mayo asked us to stop, asked them to stop, in which they were going to stop anyway, because they created the room that they thought they needed, because they also had to mix the dirt. You know, they weren't just going to take the dirt and push it. When you have to fill it, you have to mix the dirt appropriate for the compaction that you need.
I don't mean to interject, but can we move on with the presentation and the project that we have before us and not go back in history about any violations that we have no control over? Can we concentrate on the project that's being presented to us, please?
Maybe
That's-
the project is impacted.
Yeah, well,
by
we don't want to
only-
spend, I don't want to spend an hour listening to you, Frank, go over the same things we went over at the last meeting. Can we
None of that-
concentrate on the project itself, please?
I really appreciate you giving me the benefit to ask as a member of the planning board the questions that I'm concerned with, because you don't want to go over it again.
Of course I want to go over it again, Frank, but I don't want to go over it 30 times and listen to the same information that this board has already heard. So I would like to go move forward with this, one way or the other. Thank you.
Let me sort of interject. One, what's been done has been done. Let's look at what's got to happen to go forward. So questions along those lines, perhaps, Frank.
All right, I'll move on to some comments and things that I would like to see as conditions. I think I was pleased to hear the general direction that some of the engineers and people from Atlantic and all spoke about. I'd like to see more, and along those lines, I would like to see an overall reduction in the project's impervious footprint. It may be an improvement over the previous or initial development, which, as Mr. Spencer said, wasn't created with them in mind, but it's still minimal, and it still removed all the buffer that was there naturally. I am definitely in favor of reducing the amount of parking. I'm not sure what the restrictions on us are. I heard that we could reduce 33% because it's what's the term, the unified project. But I'm hoping that we have more leeway there, because as I understand it, this is for a group of people that most of the employees of Spencer are not in the office. In the future, they hope to have manufacturing there, but right now we don't. You know, I would venture to guess that less than a dozen people worked at their Scobie facility inside there 40 hours a week. The rest are truck drivers and people on the road. That's the nature of their business. Therefore, we could reduce even more so the parking. Therefore, we could put that into green space and renew it, and swales and things like that, which they seem to be willing to do. So I'd hope to do that. I think at a minimum, the lot should have 50-foot natural buffers, save for where the lots are adjacent to the highway, where I think it should be at least 100 feet. Let's see. I'd like to place a limit of 100,000 cubic yards to be removed from the site, and any additional materials left on site and used to create the berm that Mr. McGregor was speaking about last week, or to make it additionally possible to screen the lot. I think a time limit should be on the removal should be set, and the bond, which they seem to agree to. As the disturbance to that site has already taken place, and the topography altered, I'd like to see, and there seems to be, I'm not an expert in this or an engineer, so I would like, and they seem to be providing state-of-the-art recharge systems, rain gardens and the like. I'd like to maximize those. I do see that presently on site, they have dug down to the water table. They may speak of the overall level being above that, but they've excavated down to the water table. There's standing water there almost every time I've been there in that pit. And there's another area that looks to me to be possibly wet all the time. So I'd like to see that explored through possibly the Conservation Commission, understand what the actual nature of that is, and to address it and protect it if necessary. I think the planting should be, they spoke of additional plantings. I'd like to see the diameter at breast height be at least 6 inches for those white pines. And I'd like to see the species be, as I've said in many other instances, 100% native species. I'd like to see that cease and desist that we've spoken of made formal. As my understanding, Massachusetts general law requires that once you order somebody verbally to stop, you must within 48 hours follow with a written cease and desist order. I'd like to see that on record. And if gravel excavation is approved, the conditions that should be applied, those found in our regulations, must be strictly adhered to. And to ensure that, I would have those regulations made part of any list of conditions. Thank you.
Mr. Spencer, would you like to address any of Ann's concerns, questions?
There's one comment I'd like to say, that the water, there was no water table exposed. What you saw was a large topography going down to an excavated area that was 100 at that level. I've walked that site many a times, miles to that site before I purchased it. There was never a water table exposed on that property. Frank, when you were down there, it was honestly after 3 days of rain. That was one of the questions. One of the other question, what was another question that you were looking to ask for, Frank? Oh, I know. 100,000 yards of dirt. With 100,000 yards of dirt, we're back to square one of the old permit, which I know the team went through. It's basically the elevated height of that building, and if that happens, I will not be in a position of putting a whole solar farm there to block the equipment.
I will just add briefly to the board that you have heard on at least 2 occasions from the professionals, the engineers, the architects, as to what this plan encompasses and what is involved with it, and without having to readdress these same issues over and over again. You've had plans submitted, modified, resubmitted. These are the plans. The plans that are submitted are the ones that will work for this particular structure. They cannot be modified to the extent that Mr. Mand is.
Sir, there's still 4 other members that have comments to make.
I understand. I'm just trying
You're
to
making a
address Mr.
summary,
Mand.
and we're not done yet.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that Mr. Mann's comments. So in order to construct the building and the topography as designed, there's not a lot of room for extensive modification. So, thank you.
No questions, comments, questions unanswered?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Tim, go ahead.
Okay. When we talk about removal of gravel here at 500,000 yards, and everybody can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. We're talking about 500,000 cubic yards, give or take. Okay? You say you want to remove it in a year's time frame. So, let's do a little calculation on 500,000 cubic yards in a 12-month time frame. If you worked every day for 365 days, you'd be around 48 to 49 vehicle trips in that vicinity, right? 17,857 vehicle trips in a 12-month period. That's 7 days a week to remove that much material off of that site. So I think that's too many vehicle trips in that particular area. So that number would have to be worked on. I heard from Atlantic Engineering that the removal is something that really needs to be done. And I saw the cross-section going down to the building, and your engineering and your firm feels that reducing the amount of material being removed from that site wouldn't work economically, feasibly, one way or another. We asked you at the last meeting to augment the landscaping along Route 3 in the area. You said your presentation last time with the plantings that have been put in place is more than sufficient, rather than saying, yes, we will augment the landscaping in that area. So I'm a little bit disappointed with that. So did we or did we not look at reducing the yardage to be removed from the site? And if you're trying to remove it in a one-year time frame, I don't think you're going to be able to do that with that many vehicle trips that would be required to remove that much material from the site. Mr. McGregor mentioned putting a buffer or a berm up along Route 3 also. I haven't seen that in any of your plans, updated or not. So I'd like to see that. I mean, yes, this is a site that needs to be developed, and I want to see this company go in here, and we need it. It's in the industrial park. But work with us a little bit. You already said you're going to reduce the parking by about 10 spots and et cetera, et cetera. But I would like to see a little bit more effort on the reduction of the yardage, even if it's 50 to 100,000 yards, something, as far as I'm concerned. Use the material on the site to create the berms that Mr. McGregor suggested along Route 3. And if there are any testing that's required to see what's going on with that material on site, I think you wouldn't have any problem doing a couple of sieve analysis tests or any testing that may need to be done before the material would be removed from the site. Again, the vehicle trips is a lot for a one-year time frame. It's probably too much to ask of any excavation company, and again, for the community itself, to see that much material being moved that fast with that many trips 7 days a week in a one-year time frame. If we do remove that much material, some time frames need to be set, dust protection, and I didn't hear anything about the gravel possible donation to the town of Plymouth. I didn't hear anything in the presentation that related to that, that was suggested and somewhat agreed to at the last meeting. So those are my comments at this point, and I thank you for the presentation this evening. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting this thing moved along with a little bit of work from both sides. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. Paul?
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Mr. Grandy said a lot of what I thought was very realistic. My only concern with doing this, if we reduce the amount of gravel taken out, the building is going to come up and be seen more readily from Route 3. If we're willing to live with that, I'm fine with that. As for parking, I drove a tractor trailer for 30 years. When I pulled my car in, I parked my car, I took my truck. There was no difference of one parking from another parking. So parking to me is irrelevant. I think this is a very worthwhile project. We need it. We need the jobs in Plymouth. We need the tax revenue that comes from this. I want to tell you something. When I moved to Plymouth, I bought this house. My taxes were $900 a quarter. They're now almost $4,000 a quarter. When is it going to stop? When are we going to have a balance that we can live with? And I'm okay, because I get age on my side. But I would hate to be a young family that's trying to make a go of it and see their tax bill go up and up and up because we fail to put in commercial development. We all need, people need jobs, number one. And when we need a good tax balance, I'm not saying level the tax between commercial and residential. I don't think that would work. But I think we need to do something for the people, not the trees. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Brigitta?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, a lot has been said about this project, and I'm not going to belabor many of the points that we've heard, but I did have the same question regarding the 10 cent per cubic yard, which I thought we had agreed upon at our last meeting, and I don't see it written in the proposal here. And I'm hopeful that it comes back and is put into the proposal. I'm going to put that in. I'd like to remind myself what we're here to vote on today. And one of those, I believe, if Robin will basically agree, whether or not the earth removal is incidental to the project or not. That's one of our votes today. Is that correct? Before us today?
Yes.
Okay, because we've heard sort of lots of discussion around that, but we are here today to vote on whether or not the earth removal is incidental to the project. There's so much scope creep that I've heard as to what we're discussing, and it's not really what we're here to vote on. It's also the recommendation to the building commissioner, and so in many respects, I think that's the reason for the scope creep. The solar panels, I believe that we asked for a bond for the solar panels so that they would go above the parking, and I didn't see that. I saw a bond for the earth removal, which I do agree with, consistent with Mr. Grandy's arguments as to whether or not it actually can be done. So I agree also with Mr. McAuliffe that we should scale that back and stay within the time frame and have a reasonable schedule of earth removal within the project. And I have one other question that we haven't discussed, and that has to do with the manufacturing process. And I'm wondering if Mr. Spencer or so can speak to this. When you begin manufacturing, will the water that you use, which may have some contaminants in it because you're going to be painting signs, et cetera, will that water be going into your septic systems, or will you have separate gray water processing? How are you going to handle the outflow from your manufacturing process in the future? But I do want to add, before you even answer that, we have such little commercial space left in Plymouth. And we have, as Mr. McAuliffe said, such a high tax burden, particularly for those that are trying to stay in Plymouth as mid-careerists and early careerists, that we really need to use our commercial land for what it's designed to be, which is commercial land. So with that, Mr. Spencer, can you address how the waste from your manufacturing process is going to go back into the ground or not?
Sure. So what we're going to be manufacturing is highway signs. So really what we use is aluminum that we get from a manufacturer already pre-cut, and we get our materials from 3M, and we apply those. We use a lot of digital equipment to make those signs. So we make all the signs, everything from stop signs to the big highway signs. We're going to be making the big highway signs that go over the road. So there's really no waste per se that you would say that goes into our septic rather than into our scrap pile back to an aluminum yard or into the recycling.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer. And I just want to say for the record, and I'm going to go back to the Board of Health because it was mentioned tonight. The standard here in Plymouth is 10 feet from groundwater for raw sewage going into our ground, 10 feet. And that can be modified to 6 feet for raw sewage going into our ground to go into a soil absorption system. So when I hear 30 to 40 feet, yes, I'd like to see soil testing. I myself prefer soil testing after the fact because it'll give me a much better idea of what's going to be happening in the ground at the time that I'm going to be using it. But I just want to put a little perspective into this discussion because right now in Plymouth, and I'll give you this statistic, we have 2.8 million gallons per day of raw sewage going into our aquifer protection zone through our septic systems into soil absorption systems or cesspools. So it'll give you a little bit of a perspective that what we're talking about here is 35 to 40 feet above the water table, which would have been very acceptable for the Board of Health and the establishment of how raw sewage enters the soil absorption system. Just a little bit of perspective. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Steve?
Which is, given the request with respect to parking, do we have any leeway in terms of further reducing the parking requirements based upon what the petitioner says they need for parking, given that this is a manufacturing facility? Or is that hard and fast as set forth by our restrictions?
So they're proposing to reduce it down to the maximum reduction under the unified complex of 33%. That's what they're offering tonight. If it's anything more than that, we'd have to talk to the building commissioner to see if there's any way to do that or if it requires a special permit.
There could be a way that if he's, and again, we need to talk to the building commissioner, he's willing to go to a further reduction provided we make some allowance for what might happen if those spaces were needed. So again, we can have that discussion with them to see how comfortable, if the planning board recommends hypothetically a 40% reduction, how the building commissioner might feel with that in light of the bylaw. And again, there might be a way to deal with it by saying, well, we'll identify some reserve spots, and if they're needed, he could ask to have them done at a later date. But we need to have that discussion with the building commissioner.
Thank you. It's just something that, given the strong desire to, A, limit every area of development on this site, to maximize our green space and to protect the area, if the petitioner has a valid basis for saying we don't need the parking, and again, parking formulas are formulas, but every business is different, and this is a manufacturing facility with a lot of space dedicated to equipment storage. I'd just like to see that if we're going to develop the space, we develop it as intelligently as we can for hopefully a long-term residential business. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With all of that, I have one additional question. I had requested a berm along the top next to the highway. Could somebody, and the planting on top of that berm, could somebody amplify on that a little bit? Let me know what the berm looks like in your design, or may look like if we added more soil to it and buffered the site even a little bit more.
Hi, Malcolm, how are you? So,
Suggested here, but it's
Yeah.
pointed out.
right now, I don't know how they say this. But right now, there is somewhat, in a certain area at the highest point of this project, there is a berm already there, which goes back down to the highway. I have no problem with trying to extend that berm to cover the gaps where it's missing, all right? Because there is that berm there. Now, you know that when you get a further north of the project, we're at 165, berms, they come and go, so I will fill that gap because the goal is to protect that whole place from being seen. But we do drop down from a high elevation of 165. When we get to this point over here where the ramp comes up, we're only at about a 140 elevation, so we're only really dropping it down 14 feet at that point. It's just going through Mount Vesuvius, that mountain in the middle, that's where we take most of the dirt out of. So we are looking to create, like I said, there is already a berm section right along facing where the building is. We will look to make that consistent, the same look without it waving in and out, in and out. And Tim, I just wanted to get to the comment that you had made about taking all that dirt in 1 year. That was only because it was commented on the last project. That is a lot of work. But if this board was saying to me, Scott, you have 1 year, one way or another, I'll get it done. I'd prefer not to. I would prefer to take it over the course of 2 years, to tell you the truth. It's a big project. I'm looking to reinvest in this town.
Any further questions, comments, or concerns on this project? How does the board feel? It seems a number of unanswered questions.
Chairman? Malcolm?
Yeah,
I have one question to the developer. So, before we make any type of motions, whether the fill is incidental or not, there is no way you're going to look at potentially using some of that material for the berm that Malcolm spoke of and reducing the removal in any way, shape, or form. Is that the case? And the testing that was brought up by Brigetta Kuhn.
I'll have Rich talk about the testing. But yes, we will not be trucking in dirt to create that berm. We will be sculpting the land. That 500,000 yards, if it comes out to 430,000 yards, that has to come off, then that's what it's going to be. We are going to sculpt this project to be something of a pinnacle of coming into Plymouth.
I understand.
I'm not Terry Edwards, Skip Landers. This is not my business, but it's what I feel, and after using all the experts here, is the best possible way to do this project. And in fact, I'm willing to take, will I be with the dirt? I'm looking to reinvest in the project by doing the solar.
Right, I agree. Now, the testing that was brought up by Brigetta and the per yard donation to the town.
Well, in regard to the testing, I believe the question was whether or not we wanted to do soil testing.
Correct?
Well, I think there was a misunderstanding there. We're not asking for a waiver to say we don't want to do it. We're just asking, we had spoke to the town engineer and just felt that we want to defer the soil testing for when the site is already at the level of.
I think that's what Brigetta Kuhn had brought up, that said she wanted to see that happen after the site was brought.
We've already committed to doing that in our response letter to the engineer. But
well, I didn't hear it answered, Rich.
Okay, well, that is the answer,
Right.
but we're just deferring it to the point of when the site's at the rough grade, then we'll be doing soil testing in each of the detention basins.
And the per yard.
That would be those guys to answer that one.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have an opportunity to put together a a package timely enough to address that particular issue. But Mr. Spencer, as part of this particular project and his reinvestment in the community, is willing to make that 10-cent donation if this project gets approved under the terms and conditions that we've submitted. So you have it.
So that is definite, okay? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask either Robin or Lee, most likely Robin, to read back the conditions now that we have added to what we have in our packet.
Thank you, Brigida. Yes, the memo that you have in your packet had not been updated for tonight. Had not been updated for tonight, so you don't have those conditions, so I will read those into the record. So the first one regarding the landscaping final plan shall include the white pines along Route 3 with a 6-inch diameter at the breast height and
6 inches, phenomenal. 6 inch? Yeah.
that's what was requested tonight.
Yeah, 6 inches, I don't even know if you can get that. That's too much.
Because I was going to say, if feasible, because I know from John Henson and Landscape Architects that it's not always easy to
I
get
don't
them.
know
or
if you
even
can
possible.
purchase a 6-inch caliber.
Okay.
Three.
So-
3. So it's just
3 to 4.
3 to 4, that's 3. Okay. That's what they have already. So they've already done the supplemental planting plan with adding the shrubs in the dense understory to the plan that they proposed already. The one thing we can add to that is to extend where the existing berm is to make the berm consistent along the highway with the landscaping. We have our standard lighting is to comply with the prevention of light pollution zoning bylaw. We have our standard, prior to the issuance of an occupancy permit, a registered professional engineer must certify that the drainage systems, driveways, curbing, and parking areas will be installed according to accepted practices and in compliance with the zoning bylaw and approved site plans. Then we have several of the ones that have to do with gravel removal with the overburden shall be stripped with topsoil and subsoil stored separately on site and seeded to prevent erosion for the use of restoration of the site. A minimum of 6 inches of topsoil shall be placed on areas designated to be restored to the natural state, such as side slopes, open space, and areas that are not otherwise improved. All areas of excavation and access ways to earth removal operations shall be clearly marked with legally posted no trespassing signs. Areas of steep slope or grade as judged by the permit granting authority, the building commissioner for zoning permits in Section 3, and the zoning board of appeals for special permits in Section 4 shall additionally be fenced and clearly marked danger keep out every 150 feet. The final plans I have shall show a reduction in parking to 234 spaces, which is the 33% reduction as allowed under the unified complex. The earth removal from the site is limited to 1 or 2 years. Talking tonight about the timing of that. We wanted to put a timing on that, and that needs to be determined tonight. If it's 1 year, or is it going to be 2 years?
Hours of operation for gravel removal has to be incorporated into any type of decision there. Dust control.
Yep.
Hours of operation.
Yeah, hours of operation, dust control, the routing, we've got the truck routing route, so we've got that. We've also got, the petitioner shall provide a bond to restore the site if the build-out is not constructed within 3 years. The plans to include state-of-the-art on-site recharge systems such as rain gardens, et cetera, incorporated into the stormwater design.
Testing.
And the testing of soils is deferred, but shall be provided on site at rough grade. And 10 cents a cubic yard will be donated to the town for the removal of the gravel removal. We got the solar, a bond for the solar panels. I don't have the language for that. A bond for the solar panels. And I think that's it.
We were going to look into a maximum of parking spaces removed, see if that's permissible under the building commissioner to exceed the 33%.
With the building commissioner about that, and in the interim right now, I've put in the maximum possible right now, but we'll find out if we can reduce that even further.
And then I think the question remains 1 year, 2 year, if you want to sub that.
1 year is not long enough to remove all that.
So 2 years.
2 years.
So then we'd have 2 years on that.
The berm, Robin, that we're talking about, the berm, we should have a specific height on a specific elevation on that. The purpose is to block the view of traffic, so there should be a specific elevation all along that actually does that.
I don't know what it would be.
It's going to be a minimum height. Do you have a suggestion for a minimum height?
Well, since the elevation changes, I think maybe we can make the reference based upon the height at Route 3, so you keep a certain elevation above that, above Route 3.
The berms that are adjacent to the highway right now are approximately 4 to 5 feet. So the idea was to just kind of match that along that fence line.
So it would be 4 to 5 feet from the elevation of Route 3.
That's 4 to
5 feet
of the elevation at Route 3, above the elevation of Route 3. Is that sufficient?
That's,
Malcolm?
I would think it would be more than that. I would think about 6 or 7 feet would be a sufficient elevation above the surface of the highway all along the property boundary, if it can be done and maintain the same elevation of the excavation, or the same slope of the excavation. You have to do some analysis to figure that out.
Is Malcolm saying 7? 5 feet now. It's 5 feet now.
it varies.
It varies.
It's not a level elevation, it's about 4 to
No.
5
You don't
feet.
want it to be. You want it to be undulating so it looks like natural terrain versus,
Very,
4 to 7?
yeah, very.
4 to
varying
7.
4 to 7.
So Malcolm, we're talking about varied from a height of 4 to 7 to give it a little bit more of a natural look versus just a 7-foot wall.
Okay, that's fine, but 4 foot all along is not sufficient, I don't think, to do the job that we want done with it.
so staff would work on the conditions as far as the gravel removal would be concerned. Timing,
Yes.
no
We have
no
the
standing vehicles, no vehicles started at certain times, but you know, that,
Yep, the standard, yep.
the
from
standard.
7.
To protect the roads, we got that with the 10 cents.
Yep.
Got it, okay.
All native species in the plantings?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, so the vote is to 2 votes, Lee, or is it 1?
However you want to do it. You can approve it and find that it's 2 votes, so.
So the vote, my motion is to support the building commissioner's determination that the gravel removal is ancillary to the project. That's my motion.
Second,
You want to do that now, when we don't have all the conditions actually in front of us?
Well, she just read them off. Robin just read the conditions off, right?
Yeah, okay.
So they're in the decision.
We have a second. In favor? Brigitta?
Yes.
Jim? Paul?
yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Malcolm? Yes. Jim? Are you there?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It's unanimous.
Second motion needs it, that we need. Move to approve the site plan? Move to approve the site plan with the conditions in staff's report.
Second.
Okay. In favor, Brigitta,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Jim,
Right.
Malcolm, yes, unanimous. That's it. Thank you.
Boyd, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is an appointment to the planning board representative to the planning board representative to the master plan task force. Do we have any interest in anybody on the planning board to be on that task?
Mr. Chairman,
interested.
I'm interested as well.
So we only have one member?
No, Frank wanted it as well.
No, we only have one member for this
Yeah.
committee? It's our committee.
The way we've constructed this task group, it's actually the Comprehensive Master Plan Task Group. The committee itself will follow after the task group has finished its duties. And there's one member of the planning board, there's one member of the Committee of Precinct Chairs, and there's one member of FinCom that will be the board members that will be part of this task group. So yes, we have one member of the planning board. This group is required to obviously report back to the planning board as it's doing its work.
Okay, so we have two contenders.
Do we have any?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So Frank and Steve are interested.
I'll make a motion to support Steve to that committee.
We have a motion. Second,
I'll second.
in favor? Brigitta,
I'm in favor of Steve.
Paul,
I'm in favor of Steve.
Jim,
Yes. That's a yes for Steve.
yes for Steve. I'm in favor of Steve. Frank,
Well, I will make it unanimous.
That's kind of you.
Thank you very much.
Kind of you.
any other business?
Yeah, I'd like to just make just a quick statement, somewhat of a statement. So our board member, Mr. Mann, presented us with something this evening called a point system. And I'm not familiar with the point system, and it has not yet been presented to the board. I think it's a wonderful idea. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. I was a little concerned that some of the rationale for what we were voting on had to do with the point system without us having actually been introduced to it or have any idea what it meant. So I really had to refrain from those parts of the argument, but I'm looking forward to the time when we learn more about evaluating construction or development through a point system that Mr. Mann is going to bring to us. So thank you for all those efforts, and I look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, before we go on with Lee's, I have one thing that I'd like to bring up, Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
under
sir.
other business.
Okay.
I'm in receipt of a email or a letter from a planning board member requesting that the town planner recuse himself from future planning board meetings and/or anything to do with Spencer Realty. And it's signed by Mr. Mann, member of the planning board. And I would be okay with this letter if it said citizen of Plymouth. But when it states member of the planning board, it represents and gives the appearance that the rest of the members on the planning board agree with the letter that went out to the sitting planning director and acting town manager. So I think we need to, even though I think it's, again, okay if it was sent as a citizen of the town of Plymouth, I think it's imperative this board works together before any letters go out to any entity, whether it be the Board of Selectmen, Board of Health, Committee of Precinct Chairs, village steering committees. We're not in the habit of sending out letters asking for people to recuse themselves from certain things that go on within the planning board or any other things that happen within this town. So I think we need to do something along the lines of ensuring any letters that go out from any particular member are approved by the members of the planning board. If you want to send a letter out with an opinion based on any subject whatsoever, you do it as a citizen. But certainly, the whole board wasn't aware of this letter going out or email going out. So I'd like to bring that up for discussion this evening before I go home, and I know it's late. We can bring it up at a further meeting and discuss how we should approach how we send letters out individually as a board.
If I could too, I wasn't going to say anything, but I've served this town for over 30 years in a range of capacities, on a range of very difficult issues, various different stakeholders, representing the town, representing neighbors, abutters, opponents, supporters, and it is a little disappointing to me to actually have somebody imply somehow that there is some conflict for me to do this. I work for the planning board, I work for the Board of Selectmen, I work for opponents, I work for supporters. I view my job as a mediator more than it is anything else, and there's nothing further from the truth, and I did find it very disappointing.
As did I when I read it. So I would ask the chairman maybe put something on the agenda that we have a little future discussion on that particular item. That may be looking at parliamentary procedure as it reverts to our future meetings, whether that be the adoption of Robert's rules or something along those lines. We need to start working together as a board and start acting professionally and start running professional meetings. That's my opining for this evening. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can briefly speak, I've known Lee Hartman for over 20 years. I have never met anyone that's more professional than Lee. He's served a planning board in the town of Plymouth without any self-thought or any consideration for himself. He does what he believes the planning board and what he believes the town is doing. So thank you very much, Mr. Hartman. You have done a great job for over 20 years. Thank you very much.
Put that on the agenda, meeting for further discussion.
Thank you.
So we have a lot release for one lot on Wadsworth Estates. They've done a bunch of work. We're holding security in the form of $175,000 to finish the work. The asphalt is all in, all the paving's in. They've got some sidewalk and landscaping to do, but again, we have adequate money, and we're recommending the release of the one lot, lot 5231.
So made.
Second.
Motion and a second. In favor, Frank?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Brigitta?
Yes.
Jim? Malcolm? It's released. Any other business?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing back the discussion regarding Mr. Hartman's interactions with the board. And with that, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
You have a motion?
Second.
Third.
In favor, signify by waving your hand. All right. Night all.
Night.
Good night.